to join us today. As I said, this is the culmination of over 3 years' work, which began before I started at Stopwatch. My name's Rachel, I'm the operations manager at Stopwatch. And it's a huge collective endeavour. And I'm so pleased that we have key players in the making of the project here today to really speak to the project and its findings. This is the soft launch of the project report, which you can find on our website. And I know that my colleague Jodie is going to put the links out towards the end of the session so that you can easily read the report if you haven't already. We are going to be having a hard launch with copies of the report in the House of Commons in June sometime. So we very much hope to be inviting you all to join us for that celebration and platforming of this really important piece of analysis and research that documents a really meaningful project that's taken place, as I say, over 3.5 years or so. I'm going to hand over in just a moment to, as I said, the key players. We have co-researchers with us and facilitators who are here to go into some detail about the project. But I did want to just emphasise what a rallying point we really hope this is for coalition building with those of you who we have shared interests with. And I wanted just finally just to mention that some of the content, as I'm sure you're aware, will be sensitive. People have spoken very bravely and openly about their experiences with the police, and I just wanted to say that towards the very end of this section, this launch, there will be some material that some of you may find difficult to hear. So I just wanted to mention that at this point. So here's the structure for today. We have Professor Louise Owusu-Kwarteng here, who's going to be speaking a little bit about the approach that the project took, which is a participatory action research project and around intersectionality and gendered policing. I'm just checking, I'm just having a look around just to see if Shenna was able to join us or not. I'm not certain that she's actually here or not. Shenna's not here at the moment, so hopefully we'll be speaking around the process of the project as well, and stages too. I'm sure that we'll all be able to speak towards that too. We have one of our co-researchers, Faith Agba-Butler, here, which we're really pleased for, and also Maisie Adair, who have both been part of the project for since the start, I believe, which is wonderful. And then we have 2 members of Stopwatch. Rebecca Dooley is going to be speaking to the findings and lawfulness of the search, and Jodie Bradshaw will be speaking about policy recommendations. Then we very importantly have space for you all to please share your questions and your thoughts and responses, which we'll do our best to answer. Okay, so I'm going to hand over right now to Louise. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm just going to share a couple of slides, if that's okay. Yeah, hopefully, yeah, they should come up. 1 second. Can you see? Oh, no. Can you see? Can you see them?
No, we can't see them.
Right, okay.
Of you.
That's very annoying. Okay, can you see it now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great,
yes.
fantastic. Okay, thank you. Thanks. So, I mean, the first thing I'm going to say is that it's been a real honour to be part of this project. And I'll say there's a lot of reasons, but I mean, first of all, working with the girls was just, you know, it was really, really insightful and very, very engaging. And, you know, what I really love about, I always say this about the next generation down from me, and Generation Z, is that, like, you know, you don't keep, you just say what it is and you actually act. And this is what I got from this project. But then also because I've worked in policy making before, and, you know, one of the things that I always thought was missing from the process was actually hearing from people that had actually been impacted by certain things. And I think this is why I really, really liked the approach that was being adopted here. So, you know, I really, really thank you for allowing me to kind of be part of this process. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a summary of what we did, and then, you know, just then talk through what, you know, yeah, just talk through a couple of other things as well. So in terms of, like, when I became involved in the project, it was actually one of my colleagues, Leonie, who sort of said, oh, like, you know, can you do this? And I was just like, yeah, I'm literally a bit of hands off. So, you know, I spoke with Shenna, and then she invited me to participate. So, you know, I did my first sessions, I think it was with the London group in late 2021. So yeah, so, you know, I worked with London, worked with Nottingham, where I grew up. I'm from a Nottingham girl, Liverpool and Manchester. Okay, so the things that we covered was sort of like introduction to research methods, because I have to remember that not everybody's a sociologist like me. Some people have done it, but then some people hadn't. And also, I think the way, you know, like sometimes, for those who had done research methods, sometimes the way that it's taught, it's very sort of like, you know, this is this, but not actually involving the person. And, you know, what we did was we actually talked about kind of like the appropriate approaches for participatory action research. And I think, given that this is about kind of researching communities, and sort of like, you know, using, again, you know, this approach to policy making, making sure that those communities involved actually have a say in changing things, it's really important to use a method that kind of like reflected that. So we talked about the use of kind of like qualitative approaches, and also so that they could understand experiences. Okay, so we used interviews, but in those interviews, I think, again, with traditional research methods, there's always that separation between those people that are actually the researchers and the people that they are researching. And that kind of creates an unnecessary, in my opinion, a power dynamic. So in order to make things kind of more equal, what I was also encouraging people to do was to sort of like sharing their own stories within reason, so that it doesn't sort of take over, but within reason, because this can also sort of show that actually address the power dynamic, but also encourage other people to speak and go. And there's a way of supporting the people that were, you know, were involved in the research. I shared my own experience of being stopped and searched in 2012. Okay. And then the other thing that we did as well was we kind of did some troubleshooting, because when you're doing practical research, you have to think about, okay, well, if this has gone right, great, fantastic. But, like, you know, there are potential things that could go wrong, like people could, you know, drop out at the last minute. You know, we have to make sure that people are well safeguarded, because, like, some of the people that we were kind of like that were involved in the research might have been underage, might have been under the age of 18. So it's just sort of thinking, okay, well, what do we do? How do we kind of like support and work with people? Because it's very different to working with adults. So we talked about those sorts of things. And again, it wasn't just a sort of like a one-way thing. I actually got the students to got the co-researchers to kind of work together with each other and interview each other and reflect on how well it went or what needs to be, you know, improved and stuff. And then in 2022, we went to the House of Commons the first time, and we saw Bel Ribeiro Ade. And, you know, it was a really phenomenal experience. And I think that was the night when Boris Johnson they were voting against him, and he survived it, but he lost it in the end. Anyway. Right. So in terms of, like, you know, intersectionality and gender policing, what was really interesting when I was talking to our co-researchers was that, you know, in sharing their experiences, what it really, really kind of did was that in a lot of ways, it just kind of mirrored that broader picture. about, you know, the way that women are policed. And what we can see, I mean, already in society, we can see that there are gender inequalities. But, you know, in this way, it kind of like ratchets up a little bit, because, like, you know, sometimes we can see that there's an abuse of power, but unfortunately, it's not something that, not to say that it's not spoken about, but I don't think, and as we've seen from this research, it's not spoken about enough, but it's there. And also because women are, sorry to say it, but, like, you know, we are subordinated in society, you know, this often abuse of power and the inequalities and stuff, it just is amplified. So this happens to women, but then when it comes to sort of global majority or women of colour, we're more likely to receive harsher policing. So this could be through intimidation, through threats. I mean, you know, again, sort of sharing my own experience of being stopped and searched in 2012. I wasn't doing anything, but, like, I was accused of being part of a burglary in New Cross. And then as soon as I said that, you know, like, actually, I work here, I'm an academic, then he switched. But then, you know, like, when I kind of pointed out and I said, look, you know, you can't be doing this sort of thing. And then, you know, basically I was told I was being watched. So that was quite interesting. You know, so it could be that, or it could be stop and search. And sometimes this is, you know, in fact, not sometimes, a lot of the times it's kind of rooted in stereotypes, because, you know, again, this stereotype of, you know, women of color, you know, somehow that we're unruly, and, you know, like, we're already being policed in all other contexts as well. You know, like, we're sexualized, you know, like, there's the adultification bias, as we saw in the case of, you know, child Q. You know, sometimes people just think that, okay, yes, we're of a certain age, we don't need any protection, we don't need any care when it comes to sort of like policing us. So, you know, these things happen. And as we've seen, you know, like, there are some very, in extreme cases, death or being maimed, like in this case of Cherry Gross. So Cherry Gross, I do remember this. I was 10 when it happened, after the Brixton riots in, I think it was in 1985, and then the police did a raid on her house, shot her, and then she was in a wheelchair for 26 years. So this is an extreme case, but it happens. And I suspect that there are a lot more cases than this, but we don't really hear enough about them. And this brings me to my next point, and this is why I think participatory action research as a way of informing policy is really important. Because, like, first of all, you know, like, there's a lot of that, there's so much work done around kind of like, you know, the experiences of men of color. And I think this is very, very important, because otherwise, if we don't see what's happening, again, you know, you get cases like George Floyd's, or, you know, as the Duggan murder, as we saw in 2011. But also we're seeing that there are cases of women. And, you know, unless it's those extreme cases like Cherry Gross or Child Q or, you know, whoever, we don't really hear about it. But it's, and the other thing I would say is that, like, yes, there's data out there, there's numbers and statistics, but I, as a qualitative researcher, maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I think we have to be hearing about the experiences. We need the data to tell us how many of these cases are happening, but if we don't understand what, why, how, we're not going to be able, it's not enough to kind of like inform what should change. So I think this, again, this is why the approach taken in this research is very, very important. So, you know, hats off to everybody that was involved. And again, I'd like to thank you all very much for sort of, you know, allowing me to participate, because it's been a real honor. So thank you. Thanks very much. And I shall stop.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Louise.
No problem.
So am I right in thinking that unfortunately we don't have Shenna at the moment? No, that's right. Okay. So if then I could please pass over to you know, the key drivers, really. So we have here today Faith and Maisie, who are two of the sort of the core co-researchers, the research team who really drove this project. And who led on it. And I wonder if Maisie and Faith, in just speaking a little bit about your experience, if you could talk a little bit about the project itself, perhaps something about your about the stages of the project, or about particular aspects of it that you might like to share that you felt worked particularly well. Can I pass to Faith first of all, please? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Apologies for any background noise, first of all, because I'm in a library. I'd like to say, yeah, as Louise said, has been a great privilege to be part of the project. We've just gelled together as a team. There was also that emphasis on well-being as well, taking care of our mental health whilst doing this. It was really disheartening to hear the experiences of a lot of young women, and it's been a long journey, 3 years. In the beginning, we started with some training by the amazing Louise, and that was incredible because what it did is it prepared us for what we was about to go into. It prepared us for not just, being aware of, how traumatic it could be for those people we were interviewing, but also to be aware of ourselves and how we came across whilst conducting those interviews. From the interviews, from the training stage, we also did events in between. We went to Parliament, as you saw in one of the pictures, where we was able to kind of discuss more and share more about our project and what we was willing to do, and network with a lot of people as well. We eventually did do the interviews in Tottenham, where we were able to link up with another organization that was dedicated to young Black women specifically. And it was, I've forgotten the name, but yeah, they were amazing. And yeah, it's just been great. There's been a diverse, like, what's the word? The way we've gone about this project has been creative. It's been unifying. We've really been able to unify with each other, and we've used so many different avenues like podcasting. We even did a bit of art. We also were involved in workshops, running workshops about what we would well-being days for those girls as well, who we did interview, so they could like unload all of what they had experienced. But it has been absolutely amazing. And yeah, I'm fortunate and privileged enough to be part of something that's going to change something, because a lot of the time when it comes to this sorts of topic, people talk and talk and talk, have meeting upon meeting upon meeting, and end up in the same place. But really what drew me to this project is being able to be in the room with change makers and inform those policies and hold people to account for what they agree to doing. We already have research to show what is happening, but what makes this one stand out is the hidden voice of women and young girls who are also experiencing the same thing our young men are experiencing as well. So that was the gap that have been fortunate enough to fill in. But yeah, I'm just really happy to have been part of something like this, and I look forward to seeing the change that it's going to bring as a result.
Thank you so much, Faith. Brilliant. Maisie.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I'll start by saying that I got involved in this project due to Michael Shiner, who I believe is here, who works with StopWatch, and he was actually my academic mentor at university. And I was doing a project for my own university degree that I was really enjoying, and he thought that he would put me in touch with Shenna, and I'm so grateful that he did, because my involvement with Stopwatch has honestly just like paved the path for me as a person, and also me professionally. I think the biggest thing I'd like to say about this project is that there's a lot of girls out there and a lot of women who we didn't get to speak to, who we haven't spoke to, and these are women from all walks of life, and we won't ever be able to gain access to everyone, but it's important that we've started this, and we've opened up a channel of communication, so that hopefully there's an awareness there now for people who were previously unaware, and there's also a space where maybe a woman or a girl will stumble upon our project and find a bit of solace and comfort from it. I would also like to say that hopefully it can provoke a national conversation. I've been able to use what I've learned and bring it to my career, and really just everyone I meet, I tend to talk about this project, and it really does shine a light on things that a lot of people aren't aware of, and it's shocking the things we discovered, even though we ourselves had a basic awareness of what people have to say. And I think that this is a project that can be really useful for police as well, and making a change and making a difference. And we know these girls' stories because we went out and we spoke to them, and we actively tried to find women and girls. We went to Manchester, we went to Liverpool, we went to youth clubs, and as Faith said, really, we really tried to seek people out. And I think that's really what I find a hallmark of our study, is that hopefully we actually gave the women and girls we spoke to a nice experience, and they didn't just feel like we were using their voices. We were actually championing them and giving them actually hopefully a nice day and a nice time to come together and meet one another. And yeah, I'm really proud of what we've done, and hopefully when questions are opened up, I can be a bit more succinct and share a bit more light. But that's my overriding view of what we've done here, and I'm really proud of it, and I'm very grateful to Stopwatch, and also the girls who I worked with on the project, my co-researchers. Yeah, we really bonded, and we became like it sounds really cheesy, but probably a form of family to one another. Yeah, and definitely what Louise said, that open discussions and talking about our own experiences, it was really lovely.
Thank you so much, Maisie. Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Rebecca.
Thanks, Rachel. So just to kind of touch really briefly on some of the kind of headline findings of the report, and some of the most shocking, but maybe for us in this space, sadly not as shocking findings. So there were 25 girls and young women interviewed from London and Manchester, and of those 25, 11 had been subject to a stop and search, 15 had been stopped, and then 11 had been subject to a stop and search. And one of the things that came out, and as we've already kind of mentioned around cases like Child Q, is that it seems that a particular harsh treatment that women are suffering more at the hands of police is strip search, being used not at all for the purpose that it is meant to be used for, but as a tool of punishment, really, for when women are either asserting their rights either for themselves, or some of the cases they were bystanders or in the company of sometimes males being searched and being stopped, and were merely asserting what police were supposed to be doing and speaking up when things were going wrong. And in turn, the situation escalated and these women ended up being strip searched, which is obviously a wholly inappropriate and unlawful use of that power. And that was quite a key finding and a takeaway that specifically to girls and young women, it seems to be a way of, as Louise touched on, humiliating, sexualizing women, and is almost quite a specific tool that is being used by the police against girls and young women. In terms of the lawfulness around a lot of the stop and searches, I would say in my very kind of overview basic assessment of the searches that took place, that not a single one of the searches could be described as being entirely lawful. There was at least one breach of the PACE code, so Police and Criminal Evidence Act, the codes of practice. There was at least one breach in every single search. In all of the searches, so all 11 women, girls and young women who were stopped and searched, in not a single one of them was a girl or young woman given a record of their search or how to obtain one. And this is something we see commonly happens across all searches. So this is definitely something that echoes what we've come across anecdotally. And that is a requirement under PACE. That is a legal requirement, something that police are meant to do in order to make a search lawful. Additionally, and perhaps more concerningly, definitely more concerningly, is that 7 out of the 11 participants who were searched weren't even given a reason for their search. And that is something that is absolutely key. So not only for the person being searched to understand, but for the police to be able to say and justify why they are searching. So it is incredibly worrying that if that reason is not being given at the time, was there a reason? And are the police then, when having to document a search, as they have to do in order to have a record, are they then retrospectively applying reasons that didn't exist at the time? And that is something that is extremely concerning. So that was kind of in terms of lawfulness. There were other findings in terms of the conduct of interactions that took place, and these were interactions that weren't all stop and searches. So like we said, 15 of the 25 had been stopped, 11 of those had been searched, and then the remainder had other interactions with police. Sometimes it was as victims of crime, some of them had been arrested, all different types of interactions. And despite those interactions all being different, in 24 of the 25, so that is almost all of the interactions, the interviewees deemed that the behaviour of the police in those interactions was emotionally abusive or unprofessional. So it shows it is not just stop and search issue, it is not an arrest issue, it is not a strip search issue, it is wholesale. Almost every single interaction that these girls and young women had with the police left them emotionally scarred. Force was used in 7 of those interactions, and again, they weren't all stop and searches, they weren't all arrests, and in only 1 of those 7, I would describe the force as being reasonable and necessary in that circumstance. Also, in particular, there was a white officer present at every single interaction, but the presence of an officer from a Black or minority ethnic background was almost absent. There was only an officer present in 2 of the interactions, which again creates an even more traumatic, scary environment, an environment where there is no cultural understanding on the part of the police in what exactly they are doing and how they are behaving with the girls and young women that they come across. And the final thing that I'll touch on is that we found 8 of the 25 participants knew their rights during whichever kind of interaction it was. But what was most concerning was that even those 8 or others who knew perhaps some of their rights when they exercised them, in almost all cases, they ended up being punished in some way, whether this was the stop turning into a search, or the search turning into an arrest, and the arrest turning into a strip search. However it escalated. And even if it didn't escalate in that way, what was found across these accounts was that the treatment of the girl or young woman by the police became more aggressive, more hostile, and just heightened the interaction and escalated it in a way that was entirely unnecessary. So we have some kind of comment in the report around this, that it's one thing to know your rights, but what needs to happen, and Faith, as you were talking about changes that need to happen, is that there needs to be a respect on the part of the police for those rights, and asserting your rights cannot and should never be met with further punishment and degrading treatment in the form of a strip search, as happened in a lot of these cases. I'll hand over to Jodie, who's going to go through the recommendations.
Thanks, Rebecca. So obviously we're quite conscious that the sample size was 25, but just to emphasize that systematically throughout the report, we're backing up the ways in which those findings are generalizable on the national level, because quite sadly, our findings very much do mirror the experiences of people across England and Wales more generally. But also, as Louise touched upon, it's really important to ground these in what these concrete experiences look like, because I think when we reduce people to abstract statistics, it doesn't quite tune in with the severity of their experiences. So I just wanted to run through some of the quotes, which are by all means just a small snippet of the extensiveness of what's covered in the report. These don't even fully do justice in terms of a brief preview of all of the experiences that we ended up getting from these testimonies. So one of our interviewees talked about their concerns with regards to accountability, and they shared with us, because it's only the fact that you're the opposite sex, the fact that you have power and you're abusing it, you've now become a different kind of entity. You're more scarier now because you're now somebody who can actually beat me up and get away with it. You're not just like in a domestic violent relationship with someone who, if you beat me up and I call the police on you, they're going to come, they're going to rescue me. If the police beat you up, who are you going to call? And we relate to this a broader preoccupation that StopWatch has with the fact that the vast majority of complaints against the police are first and foremost handled by the local police force, so colleagues of the police officer who would have been involved in the cases of misconduct. And in the cases that are escalated to the Independent Office for Police Accountability, for police conduct rather, 18% of their staff are comprised of ex-officers. And so we're operating in a framework where it's quite difficult for many of these young women and girls to actually get the justice that they are seeking. On the topic of disproportionate use of force, which there were countless experiences touching upon this, but just to give an example of that, one interviewee describes how I was in a domestic violence relationship. So there were days where I was being abused by him, and then the one day that I decided to fight back, he decided to call the police. They turned up to my house with like 10 men. I've opened it and I've seen it's them, and I've tried to close the door. But by then, they've already forced entry. I ran back upstairs and I was basically pinned down to my bed by all of these men. And quite a few of our testimonies touch upon this experience of having an excessive number of police officers being called to the scene, especially in response to the very low level of threat that's actually at stake here. And this interviewee ended up speaking to us about how the officers were perfectly aware about who she was, and that she was a woman, that she was fairly petite, because she had previously made reports of domestic violence to the police force. So they had that prior context, and this is the response that attended to that interaction. On dangerous traffic stops, one of the interviewees says, I carried on driving, and then about 2 minutes later, I heard sirens flash and a police car swerved in front of me, and I had to emergency brake to stop. Then all of a sudden, about 4 police officers came running up to the car, all with them big guns. You see them with at airports, and started banging on the windows with the guns and trying to open the door. I opened the door and I just remember at this point, I was just crying and shaking. They literally had guns in my face. Then they said my car came up on a system and it had gangs and drugs markers. In the report, we expand upon the multifaceted aspects of this experience because we know that in traffic stops more generally, they tend to be racially disproportionate, especially Black people are more likely to be targeted for traffic stops. We are also, as an organisation, quite concerned and preoccupied by the issue of markers on cars because people don't typically know that their car has been marked and they're more likely to experience a traffic stop. So in terms of transparency and a presumption of innocence, we have very strong questions to raise in this regard. On police harassment, one of the interviewees says, so I've had police harass my family or my dad. So my mum, she has mental illnesses, and everyone's very well known, especially to the government. So growing up, I started living with my dad, and it's every week or every day she would call the police for something, even though she's not in my life. And it would be like the police come in, bang in the middle of the night. So like every day, middle of the night. So we've had that. And they came to arrest my dad one time, and it was like with no reason. It was just they came, they searched the house and just took my dad because my mum had put in a complaint, but wasn't sure why until afterwards. This touches upon what Rebecca was saying earlier about how you need to be informed about the grounds for the arrest and the legislation that's being used for that, but also calling into question the proportionality of carrying out these granted with a police warrant, but turning up to the house in the middle of the night, and how disruptive that is, especially to this person who was a teenager at the time of the events that this was happening, and how frequently this ended up occurring, and whether that is intelligence-based policing in these cases. There were also lots of interviewees who ended up speaking to the issue of racial profiling. This interviewee describes how they just arrested me purely because of the color of my skin. Because after they closed the case and before they closed the case, they said basically, no, it's absolutely fine. Nice car, Black girl, money. And in my head, that makes me believe they just think drugs, fraud, all the things that they associate with Black people. That's what I felt at that time. I almost felt like it was a crime to be Black and have something nice and to do a bit of Christmas shopping. A very prevalent concern all the way throughout the project was the ways in which interlocking systems of oppression are very much at play within policing. So in other words, how it's not just women and girls that have a rather gendered specific experiences of police interactions, but how those are all the more so the case for Black women in particular, and the stereotypes and caricatures that informed the basis upon which they were suspected for being involved in criminal activity by the police, only to be found that they get a no further action slip at the end of it. On the topic of violent strip searches, and the next couple of slides are going to be quite harrowing, so I just want to give a warning to everyone because of that. This interview describes how I was handcuffed behind my back. They were kneeling on me and kind of hit my head off the concrete floor, and they were kind of strangling me with my scarf. They tied my legs together and cut off my clothes with scissors, and they ripped my earrings out. When they had me completely naked, they touched my breasts and between my legs. While all this was going on, there was male officers standing at the open door watching. Once they'd finished, they put me in a disposable suit, but it wasn't done up properly, so my breasts were still exposed, and they carried me through the station like that. Evidently like a really serious case of disproportionate use of force and allegations of assault that's at play. We know that the regulations pertaining to strip searches say that it should be done in private, and this was within view of male officers, that you shouldn't be seen by someone of the opposite sex unless you explicitly call for that as your preference. And being paraded around the station really speaks to a frequent point made by many of the interviewees about how strip searches were used as a disciplining tool. Some of the interviewees were also subjected to multiple strip searches. So this interview describes, so I would intervene in the stops, and on multiple occasions that I can think of, they reacted very negatively to the fact that I was standing there with a good distance saying, you know, I'm going to record this. So that for me resulted in being strip searched 3 times. This is one of the testimonies that Rebecca was touching upon earlier, where this individual would intervene in stop and searches by being an observer, which we're all very much entitled to do, and was doing so in the case of a teenage boy who was being strip searched in public, not for intimate body parts, but all the same, there was a violation taking place there. And she was telling the teenager what his rights were, and maintaining that distance to not be obstructing the stop and search. And yet the response that she received was for that to be escalated into a strip search, very much legitimizing this view that in some cases strip searches very much are not looking for anything so much as to exercise authority. In a really serious case, we had an interviewee come forth with allegations of assault against police officers. So in this one, she says, "I've asked for the body footage, but there are hours and hours and hours missing from it. I remember being in the back of the van and then someone getting in the back with me, and then I completely passed out. The body footage shows me in handcuffs getting into the van, but then nothing for 2 hours for a 10-minute journey. I woke disoriented and in a cell. The rest of what I remember happening is what I saw in the police station footage. I sobered up after about 5 hours, but from then on, the footage goes missing. I was strip searched. I was acting very strangely and out of character. There is a lot of video footage missing, but I go from being clothed to naked, and at one point I'm bleeding. I've gone from being dressed to undressed again. I don't remember taking my clothes off. I had anal and vaginal bleeding that I didn't have at the time of arrest." For this individual, her friend was actually concerned that she was a suicide risk, so called the police in the hopes that there would be a safeguarding intervention, and also mentioned to the police that she had taken drugs that evening. And naturally, that would be cause for responding with sensitivity and being conscious of her heightened vulnerability. And by all means, that's not the experience that she described having. So the final anecdote that I wanted to touch upon is trauma, because a very common thread throughout the entirety of the report is the long-lasting impact that these interactions had on these individuals, especially in terms of taking a toll on their mental health, because this isn't just a one-off discrete interaction. This affects their day-to-day life of driving to the supermarket, dropping their kids off to school, walking in the street, and the feeling of being afraid of hearing police sirens or seeing police officers on patrol. So this interviewee says, "They knew I had a child and they could have arrested me or asked me to come in at any other time than 3 p.m. They specifically came to my place of work to arrest me, knowing that I would lose my job, which I did. They were aware of where I lived. They could have just come to my house. I had done nothing wrong apart from being with someone who had committed a crime. My whole life was ruined after the arrest. Not only did I lose my job, I also had to leave an area that I lived in and start a new life. It was traumatic. And that was all caused by that one arrest that had no further action that could have been done in a different manner." So, conscious of time, so I'm going to just very briefly run through the policy recommendations that we formulated in response to some of these really heavy accounts. First and foremost, we absolutely back a prohibition of use of force against girls and boys during stop and search. We extend this to boys because minors just as much, boys who are minors are just as much entitled to be treated with a safeguarding response, to be treated as children, and to live a police-free life as much as possible. And as an extension of that, we are calling for under 18s to be presumed to be exploited victims rather than offenders, with in mind that stop and searches would only take place where absolutely necessary to prevent serious harm following arrest. This is especially in response to some of the extensive academic research that we've examined, such as by Ali and Champion, which touch upon the long-term psychological impacts of stop and search on children, but often cases also on adults, in terms of developing mental health disorders such as anxiety and depression, having difficulty sleeping, recurring nightmares, and some going on to have suicidal ideation. Naturally, we would want a prohibition of strip searches of minors, absolutely. Where we won't be granted that, we're really pushing for as many stringent policies to make it as difficult as possible for police officers to abuse these powers. And with that in mind, we have called for strip searches to be undertaken by a healthcare practitioner rather than a police officer. If it's really a matter of concern for the well-being of the individual, then we don't see why a police officer is best suited for that position. And we've even had concessions by the Metropolitan Police in particular that they aren't best suited to respond to these kind of scenarios. We're calling for them for the strip search to be approved of the rank of superintendent. We want it to be as high a bar as possible for that approval to take place, so that we have some decision breakers that are taking place, so that it's not a reactionary escalation to strip searches. We're calling for them to be carried out at a police station, with in mind that the Children's Commissioner highlighted that I think it was around like 45% of strip searches of children took place in an unknown location. So we're deeply concerned by how frequently these are happening in public and the extra vulnerability and exposure that takes place here. Whereas in theory, there are additional mechanisms at play at a police station insofar as there are surveillance cameras that are in operation. There are other police officers there who will be able to see the interactions between the police officer and the person that's being strip searched. We're also calling for a safeguarding referral because there's so many people that came out of these interactions utterly devastated, as well as calling for ensuring that anyone that is taken to a police station is able to get home safely, because so many of our interviewees were released really late at night, and there were no public transport links that they were able to use. They weren't able to reach out to a friend or family to collect them. They didn't have any money on them, and so they were completely stranded. So a core recommendation that stemmed out of that was ensuring that they at least have the resources, or otherwise there is certainty that a family member or a friend will be picking them up from the station. That's all for my section, so we can open up to a Q&As. I'll pass over to Rachel to arbitrate, but to emphasize that we're very much keen to especially hear from the policy leads, facilitators and co-researchers for the responses, so that it's not just kind of StopWatch taking over and dominating the conversation a little bit.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jodie. I'm just having a little look to see if I can see any hands raised. If anyone has any questions, please do. There we go. Louise, thank you.
No problem. I think it's not so much a question, but it's just more of an observation, because I think obviously on reading review, because I got to review it the first time around and everything, but when you actually you read it again and then you hear it, those horrific experiences spoken out, I don't know, it just sometimes how amplifies it just makes it feel a whole lot worse. But you know, I just I don't know. I mean, it's very, very, very powerful, and I just really hope that people just kind of like take it on board and take on board all of the recommendations, because this is just shocking, and this is what we know, because the things we don't know, I dread to think.
Absolutely. if anyone else has any comments, they don't need to be questions.
Christina's raised their hand.
Yeah, well, it's very bleak hearing this. I don't even know what to say. It's just awful, really. You know, we know it happens to Black boys, but to hear it happens to Black girls. Having said that, I've just had a flashback when I was 13 and ended up in a police cell and they treated me bad, and that's going back 40 years ago in City Road Police Station. I can remember it, so I shouldn't be surprised. I'm not surprised, to be honest, but still bleak findings and the reports. How much have you discussed this with the police, of the report and the recommendations? How deep has this gone with the whatever police force that you've approached?
So I can maybe speak to that. So obviously you and I met at the National Police Chiefs Council where we were giving feedback. So part of our response to the Police Race Action Plan was touching precisely on that. The Home Office also did a consultation on strip searches that we responded to, where we were pushing for even more recommendations than those that were briefly touched on there. So those are some of the avenues that we've explored, and we've reached out to the Children's Commissioner about this report and these findings, and we're quite fortunate that Bel Riviero Addy will be hosting another parliamentary event for us. So we're really hoping to get a lot of attention to this issue and to kind of spread the findings far and wide, because it can't keep on as it is currently.
And what about litigation? Because I think sometimes, you know, I've been doing this for ages, and when I say 40 years, it's more like I was 12, 13 at the time, so it was longer than that, 50, 55 years ago, 50 years ago. So litigation, I think the police, you know, they need to be sued a whole lot more, because they just goes round in circles, and this is big, and I think it needs to be out there for people to hear how much it happens to girls, and obviously, you know, disproportionately Black girls, Black people, we know that already, but this is big, I think, for people to hear. So sorry, litigation, you know, we need more of that, and I don't know how your organisation or putting them in contact with other organisations could help, you know, get this to court and, you know, legal process.
Yeah, for sure. This is definitely something, it's an issue that we are looking into with our legal contacts and groups who are coming together to focus on certain issues to tackle various forms of systemic racism in different institutions. And obviously our focus is policing, and strip search is one of the areas we are looking to litigate on. So it's kind of a watch this space, because it has to be, you know, think cases has to kind of come to you, and we have to be in the right position to support. But it's absolutely a tool that we have used, StopWatch have used before, we're very keen to use. So we're connecting with all of the right people to try and be there when the right case comes along.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. I can see that we've got 3 hands raised, so if everyone is okay to stay on just for a few more minutes, I think if we can just take these, that would be terrific. So can we go to you, please, Azamina?
Yes, hi. Yeah, I completely reiterate, it's very bleak, the findings of this research, and yeah, just, I guess, shocking just to read them, although, yeah, we all know that these things sadly happen. I want to ask a research or methodological question, actually. What happens from a, I guess, not ethical perspective, but as a researcher, you know, when you have to investigate these issues, and the people you talk to start disclosing traumatic experiences, what would you advise other researchers who are doing this sort of work in how to deal with these situations? Because, even just, the people recalling these kind of incidents that happen in their life can be very traumatic. And I would love some insights and advice on that. Thank you.
Shall I answer that
Yes,
one?
please, Louise. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So one of this was all part of the kind of safeguarding and troubleshooting aspect of it, because I think whenever you're doing any kind of research like this, as you say, there is that risk of like traumatizing. So I think the very, very first thing is, first of all, making sure that people are okay to talk about their experiences, regardless of what level, regardless of whether they regard it as traumatic or not. So first, that's the first thing. The second thing is that we always say, I mean, I said that, obviously there are ethical issues and stuff, and then I gave a kind of draft of I gave an ethics form just to make sure that, just to show what they consent to, and stuff, and if it's signed and if everybody's okay with it and stuff. I mean, and those people that were under the age of 16 obviously had to have an adult support it as well. And if they were okay, but then also they were given that option that if they don't feel like they want to talk about something, or they want to stop the research at any point, then they can step out and there won't be any repercussions about it. Also, I think from memory, I think another thing that we said was that, like, it's important to just kind of signpost people to sort of like, counselling or organizations that are available to them as well. So I mean, I always remember this from doing my own doctorate as well. I mean, it wasn't as the things discussed were a bit traumatic, but not on this level. But they were the things that were said, and that they could talk to us and that they could talk to anybody. But I mean, I think those key things are establish whether they want to talk at all, make sure that they're comfortable with what it is that they're disclosing, and if they're not, they could stop any time. And then again, signposting them onto to other people. So that's how we do it and stuff. So yeah, hope that helped.
Thank you, Louise. Jodie, did you want to come in on that just to respond as well?
Just to ask if Maisie and Faith wanted to talk at all about, for instance, I know that you guys were involved in some trainings by Howard that was focused on like confidence building, or even just like how you felt with coping with doing the coding and the data analysis for some really trying and testing experiences.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. And then I think for us, I won't deny it, it was really hard. It was really rubbish. It was really harrowing, and especially I think within the group itself, people had very difficult experiences, and we just had to talk about them openly. And I think we were given confidence workshops. We had a coach, Howard, come in and teach us and constantly support us throughout that process. And then I think what Louise has said is true. That is a process we used. We, even in our interviews that we conducted, we were always checking in and making sure that people were still comfortable to share their experience. But also I would say, if I were to give advice to another researcher, is that don't shy away just because you're worried people get upset, because it can be quite cathartic for people to finally talk about something. So yeah, that's what I'd say on that.
Is Faith still here? Would you like to say anything, Faith?
Yeah, I would say I wasn't really involved in terms of, getting the results of the research. But the workshops with Power really did help for us to take care of ourselves while we was carrying out that kind of work. Another thing I wanted to add as well, in terms of, I know recommendations have already been read out, But I would also say this is why a lot of us were saying that there needs to be systemic change, and that instead of, you know, giving more power and more resources to that system that clearly shows it's not for us, that we need to put more resources into empowering the community so that we can protect ourselves, because clearly it's not working. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Faith. Absolutely. Thank you. Mark, over to you, please. I think you're on mute. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll be brief. I should be on another call, but I just had to hang on because, like everybody else on the call, I guess I'm one of the few men on the call. It's, I guess you kind of just feel, you know, it's shocking, but I'm not particularly shocked. I just wanted to maybe just raise a few ideas. One, I think that around the litigation, I think the Centre for Women's Justice are a really good organisation you should be talking to, because this does come into police perpetrated abuse, and they led the super complaint on that subject before Sarah Everard's murder, because I think how you frame this issue is going to be quite crucial in terms of how much traction you get. And the other point I was going to say in terms of politicians who will listen, I've found a green group on the London Assembly. We've done some work with the National Black Police Association around what Black police officers, that there's a paper called Shifting Culture on our website, and their experience of the misconduct process, which has just been horrific. Like I say, all this doesn't surprise me. You know, policing isn't changing, hasn't changed, and they're now going to be a whole kind of, we've got 2 years now since the Casey reviews, and there's going to be a whole kind of PR process in terms of trying to convince us, Mark Rowley, that policing has changed. And obviously we need to kind of collectively push back on that. I've got to go, but obviously, you know, hope to be involved in kind of future discussions around this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for that. I think just a couple more minutes. Koshka, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the main thing I wanted to say was thank you, just thank you, and immense respect to all of the researchers and all of the women and girls who shared their experiences. Some of my experiences of being strip searched appear in the report, and I'm really grateful for how sensitively they're handled, and it's really powerful to hear the words of others. So that's the main thing I wanted to say. I also wanted to I suppose put a question out there, which we won't have time to discuss, but it would be good to keep thinking about it together and in the spaces where we're working. Thinking about recommendations, I thought what Faith said was so important. The kind of giving more power and resources to a system that doesn't work for communities of colour, working class communities, women and gender non-conforming people. It doesn't work for oppressed and marginalised people, and it's not supposed to. And there's this kind of there's this real tension in trying to navigate that situation, where making policy proposals often pushes us into suggesting more guidelines for the police, but what we see throughout the report is that police don't follow the guidelines that they have, and in certain ways they kind of feed off guidelines, because they legitimize themselves by pointing to, well, it says on paper that these are our procedures, so that helps to kind of reassure the parts of the public that aren't subject to these kinds of practices that everything is fine and in order. And so there's that I suppose systematic problem of guidelines sometimes just becoming part of their smoke screen, and I guess part of the not the only difficulty, but part of the difficulty there is, when Faith was talking about, empowering communities to protect themselves, that seems so important, because one of the things that struck me around thinking about litigation, which is sort of on paper one of the ways that people can hold police accountable, is something that I found out through taking actions against the police, is that actions against the police are excluded from personal injury insurance. The kind of insurance that you get that enables you to sue people doesn't apply to suing the police, to put it bluntly. And I think that that's something that people who work in this area know about, but many people don't. And so they have this idea that the law is something that just can be applied and appealed to by anyone, when in fact, if you don't have thousands and thousands of pounds at your disposal, then the law means absolutely nothing. So yeah, I feel like it would be good to have more conversation about how the proposals can kind of be taking away powers and resources from police. So for example, decriminalizing the things like drugs, which they use to target and harass Black communities in particular. Yeah, just a few thoughts. Thank you so much for everything, all of this work.
Really helpful, and definitely key questions to consider. And I think for us, hopefully that we can connect and continue having these discussions beyond the scope of this. Thank you very much, Koshka. Jasmine, can I just ask you, I'm so sorry that we're running so late on time, but if you'd like to share your question, we can try to respond to it, but it will be brief, I'm afraid. Thank you, Jasmine.
No worries. I just had a question about one of the things in the research, is that given that some of the girls didn't receive a record of their encounter, and talking about accountability, how does this affect their ability to seek legal recourse if they want to? And if some of the girls or the young women have, or the women have, how was their process?
I can take this one. So from my understanding, I don't believe any of the girls or young women did seek action. I think I recall that a few of them spoke about after the fact wishing they had. For a lot of the breaches of pace that I spoke about, very unfortunately, kind of touching exactly on what Koshka's saying, bringing claims against the police is extremely difficult. And what I mean by that is the threshold for being able to get potentially legal aid funding, any kind of funding, and then being successful in that is often based on the likelihood that your claim will be successful. And in order for the courts, who are extremely biased towards the police and grant them an extreme amount of deference because they have a difficult job, and it's quite hard to persuade a court that action taken was unreasonable, illegal, etc., that even when there are breaches, clear breaches of procedure and breaches of pace, they have to result in very extreme outcomes in order really for you to get funding and kind of be able to even start bringing a case. So often the most kind of recourse that the majority of people will be able to take when it comes to any kind of unlawful stop and search, strip search, an example, would be bringing a complaint. And we know that isn't something that often tends to result in much action against officers. So it's something that we at Stopwatch are wanting to support people with, but also telling them that you can bring a complaint. Unfortunately, it's unlikely that anything will happen, which again is, you know, very bleak note to end this on, but it is unfortunately what we've got.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you. And yeah, we need to finish for now, but we very much hope to, and we will certainly stay in touch with you all. These are conversations that are ongoing. We really appreciate your engagement, your time, solidarity, and these thoughts and questions. And hopefully we can work with you on ideas for ways forward. And yeah, really making the action forthcoming rather than continual meetings and chatterings. But we very much hope to see you. We'll be staying in touch with everyone about the House of Commons event in June, and very, very much hope to see you all there. And thanks again for your time to all of the speakers and to all of you for coming. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay,
Bye.
see you later.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye.